Overview of consigned inventory from supplier. Our objectives for this section are as follows. After completing the lesson, you should be able to describe consigned inventory, explain the business value of consigned inventory, describe the consigned inventory process flow, and explain the products involved in the consigned inventory process flow. Our first topic describes what is consigned inventory, consignment agreement, and what are the benefits offered to both buyer and supplier by consigned inventory. Consigned inventory refers to items in the possession of one party, for example, customers, contract manufacturers, and so forth, but remains the property of another party, for example, the manufacturer, by agreement with those in possession. In a business use case where the product is sold between two parties, a consignment agreement is typically used to defer the changes in ownership past the arrival of acceptance of the material to some mutually agreed upon later point in time or event. Change in ownership typically occurs when the customer uses the product, for example, issues to manufacturing or sells to an end customer, or after a pre-specified period of time, such as 30, 60, or 90 days. This time period is referred to as the aging period. The purchase agreement includes the consignment terms. These are the terms of the consignment arrangement agreed upon between the buyer and supplier. The consumption advice is the document that reports the consumption of consigned inventory from the buyer to the supplier. Consumption of consigned inventory can be reported to the supplier on a daily, monthly, or weekly basis. Once consigned inventory is consumed, the ownership of the material will get transferred from the supplier to the buyer. Once the buyer takes ownership of consigned inventory, the financial settlement process is initiated with the supplier. The consumption advice is the document used to initiate financial settlement with the supplier. The consumption advice matching process resides within Oracle Fusion Payables. Users can create consumption advice matched invoices. Suppliers can also monitor the consigned inventory process through the supplier portal. Here, they can review consigned inventory on-hand quantities, transactions, and aging details. The consigned inventory from supplier solution offers benefits for both the buyer and supplier. Buyers can reduce working capital, stock write-offs, and lead times. Suppliers can increase sales, reduce lead times, and strengthen relationships with their customers. Overall, suppliers can compete on the basis of availability and delivery when finished goods are at the customer site, particularly when lead times are lengthy. Holding materials on consignment reduces lead times for items that might be required to fill the sales orders. And buyers experience increased inventory turns, thus reducing funds invested in inventory. Financial resources are available until customer commitments are ensured or items are used in production. The next topic describes the consigned inventory process flow from signing the consignment agreement to sending the payment to supplier. Here is the consigned inventory process flow. The buyer in the diagram represents the SCM Cloud user. First, the consigned inventory process is initiated by the establishment of a consignment agreement between a buyer and a supplier. The consignment agreement stipulates the terms of the consignment relationship between the buyer and supplier. Next, consigned inventory is ordered from the supplier through a consignment order. Consigned inventory is then received into the organization in the same manner as non-consigned inventory. The change in ownership typically occurs when the buyer uses the product, as defined in the previous slide. Then, the consumption advice is used to report usage of consigned inventory to the supplier on a periodic basis, again, such as daily or weekly. Then, the supplier will send the buyer an invoice for the consigned inventory which has been used. When the invoice is received from the supplier, it can then be matched to the associated consumption advice for audit and reconciliation purposes. After the invoice is validated, payment will be sent to the supplier for the consigned inventory which is used. Optionally, a pay on use can be used to pay the supplier immediately upon usage of consigned inventory. This diagram depicts the consigned inventory from supplier process flow across products. The process begins in Oracle purchasing with a consignment agreement between the buyer and supplier. The consignment agreement includes terms and conditions of purchase, pricing, and terms related to managing the consignment relationship. A consignment order is used to purchase a consigned inventory from the supplier in response to requisition demand. Next, consigned inventory is received in the same manner as non-consigned inventory. Oracle Cost Management calculates the cost of consigned inventory for valuation purposes. However, the ownership of the still remains with the supplier. The consigned inventory ownership transfers typically occurs when consigned inventory is consumed. Oracle Inventory Management will automatically generate a consumption consigned inventory is consumed. A consumption device is created to inform the supplier of item quantities, price, and dates when the consigned items were consumed. Then the supplier will use the consumption device to generate an invoice to initiate financial settlement. Payables, the supplier's invoice can be matched to the associated consumption device and submitted for payment to the supplier. Optionally, again, pay on use can be used to pay the supplier immediately upon usage of consigned inventory. In this overview